the in-class part, and then we'll have to do a practical. I will get that set up over lunch hour, and we'll probably do the practical this afternoon. There is a test at the end of this before we do the practical. It is open book, so you can reference the book for all the questions. Yeah. So we're just going to dive right in because, well, we just are. Forklift operator safety training. A lot of this first few slides is just safety stuff for the building. This is all a replica of what you get if you went to MHSA. While we are doing this, if you get lost at all, the page numbers will appear in the corner, so that should keep you in the right place in the book. In the event of an emergency, we're going to go out this door, down the stairs, and out the front door. Don't worry about the red tape. It's just there to keep people from using it to go for smoke breaks. But if we have to get out for some emergency, we can. His fire extinguisher should be right there. There is one. First aiders. Well, I'm a first aider, and I know Connor will save our lives if we need it. He'll carry us all out of the building. Washrooms, if you're not familiar with this side of the world, the washroom, there's one in the locker room through the lunchroom, and there's washrooms right beneath us. We will take breaks around the usual times. If you got to stand up or move around, go ahead. Try to stay off your phones for the most part. And we should be done by lunch. I do have to get the course evaluations for you. We'll get those later on. So we're going to go through the legislation, which is super boring, but it's all the legalities of driving forklifts. And it's a necessary part of the course. And then we're going to go through classifications, specific components, stability and load handling, operating procedures, and any other considerations that might be necessary. Again, the page numbers are here if you need to follow along with the book. You can highlight the books if you want, make a mess of them, do whatever you need. Then for the practical, we're going to go through the pre inspections to some extent. We're going to set up an obstacle course, and then we're going to have a course evaluation. So you've got to get 80% on the test. If you get a couple wrong, you can go back and look at correcting them, but we still got to aim for relatively 80% on the test. Course objectives: provide forklift operators with an understanding of the physics pertaining to forklifts, and that's the biggest thing. The reason we have to do this every 3 years is legislation changes, and a lot of people, even though they might have experience, have you taken the courses before?
One. I think one.
Took the course once. So the course is going to teach you all how forklifts work and all the physics behind it, and give you kind of a baseline understanding of why we have to be mindful of and not drive like wheel. 3 wheels is not actually a game. It's something you want to avoid. So then we outline responsibilities and legislative requirements for safe forklift operation, and confirm operators have the basic operating skills required by forklift manufacturers. A little 1 minute video just to get us into the whole thing that kind of gives you a good example of what can go wrong with forklifts. And I've seen this happen firsthand. It's pretty scary shit. So when things go wrong with forklifts, they can go wrong pretty quick, and they can go wrong pretty bad. The one thing you see there is his buddy goes running away, the streak of a human being running away. He's probably in the parking lot cleaning his shorts before his friends even come out looking for him. Sorry, Chelsea's pestering me. But yeah, you see the streak of him go running out of the way, and then all of his friends start coming out like a minute later kind of thing looking for him. Probably one of the problems with that is they're going to think he's underneath that pile. They won't even know where he is. I mean, obviously you're supposed to have your seatbelt on. That's company policy. I don't know how he got off so fast and ran like hell. In this case, it might not have been a bad thing he did because the stuff might have come in the side of the forklift. It's hard to say. They don't give us much to work with. There's no explanation. Just a video to get us going, just to get us thinking about these things. There's a few case studies in this course. They are incredibly hard to teach. They read like police reports. They're not very straightforward. Have any of you, so I'm going to skip through these because they're hard to understand. Have you guys seen any forklift incidents in your time driving ever? No?
Not really.
Okay. like I say, I've seen racks come down like what we just saw in that one a few times. People are either pushing things along the floor, and the object at the front of the pile pushes into the upright, everything comes crashing down. First job I had when I was 18, someone was offloading a bundle of pipe with a loader off they were preparing to offload pipe from the back of a trailer. The driver unstrapped his load, the pipe fell, killed the driver. That was a great introduction to the workforce. At Worley Cord, 15 years ago now, there were zoom booms being used to offload trailers. The forks were sticking out like through the object they were picking up, and as they picked up what they wanted to pick up, the forks tipped the other object behind it off the deck. And because the driver was near, the load fell on the driver, broke 20 bones in his body. Stars Air Ambulance had to come and pick him up. His life was never the same. Wrecked him pretty good. Forklifts are dangerous, fairly powerful pieces of equipment, and we just got to not take for granted how much damage can happen when things do go wrong, and make sure we're driving them responsibly. If you're loading trucks, if you're a party to that, and I think the only guy here who does that occasionally is Connor, just keep drivers away. If you can't see them or if they're too close, tell them to back up. We don't want drivers near trucks when we're loading or offloading, because things can shift and fall, and many people have been injured or killed because of stuff like that. Yeah. Do you ever drive forklifts when you're on site? I don't imagine you probably do, because you do installs and help with that stuff. Do you ever actually drive forklifts?
Sometimes. In
Oh, you actually have?
In Texas.
In Texas?
They didn't care.
They give
but
you
like
down
New
in
Mexico, they cared a lot. So
In New Mexico?
yeah, they.
Oh shit. They were a little more by the book.
Where you go. Yeah.
No, and that's just it. You're going to get different approaches. I've heard that some of the clients couldn't care less, but other ones, I'm not surprised, care a lot.
Yeah.
And that's just it. By rights, they all should care. Like, that's part of the reason we had to make sure all you guys were trained, because someone's going to ask.
We offered them tickets and everything, and they still were like, "Nope, you don't want to be responsible for it." So.
No, and that's just it. It's a big, huge game of liability, and this is kind of what plays into that. At the end of the day, the employers are responsible for the health and safety of all persons on their work site. Although everyone shares this responsibility, the employer is ultimately responsible for health and safety. So that's why you're stuck here listening to me. And if you're really lucky, you get to come tomorrow and Thursday too and listen to me more for crane training. Right? You poor bastard. But the AC should keep it cooler in here than it is in the shop. So at the very least, a little more comfortable. Every employer shall, and shall is a word we see constantly in legislation. Shall is the government's polite way of saying you must. If it says you shall do this, it is not a suggestion. It is a you will do this, or we can, you're breaking the law basically. So every employer shall ensure, as far as it's reasonable for the employer to do so, the health and safety and welfare of any worker engaged in work. So that would be you fine folks. Workers not engaged in work but present at the work site, that would be these fine folks, the contractors working on our site, and persons at or in the vicinity of the work site who may be affected by hazards originating from the work site. So basically anybody we have clients in building 2 today, we're responsible for their safety. We have contractors on site doing internet upgrades, we're responsible for their safety, and you guys yourselves doing the work, so LJ is responsible for all that in some way, shape, or form. Every employer shall ensure the employer's workers are aware of their rights and duties under the Act, regulations, and the OH&S code, and any health and safety issues arising from the work being conducted at the work site. So that's why we have our JHAs, we have tailgates, we talk, we communicate, and you need to be aware of your rights to refuse, to participate, and to know. And that's why they're going to cover all this despite this being a forklift course. Employers shall ensure that none of the employer's workers are subject to participating in violence and harassment. Employers' workers are required to be supervised by a person who is competent, familiar with the Act, the regulation, and the OH&S code that apply to the work performed on the site. And one of the largest responsibilities of the employer involves worker training. Every employer must ensure the forklift operators are trained in the use of equipment safely and understand the hazards associated with its operation. So again, that's why you're stuck in this course, learning about the hazards of forklift operation. The employer must ensure the training referred to in the legislation includes the following: the selection of the appropriate equipment, the limitations of that equipment, an operator's previous inspection, the use of the equipment, and the operator skills required by the manufacturer's specs for the equipment. The basic mechanical and maintenance requirements of the equipment. All of our maintenance is done by an outside contractor. That being said, the people operating them should still be able to check the oil, make sure there's no obvious signs of damage. But any of the actual maintenance gets done by an outside contractor. Loading and unloading equipment if doing so is a job requirement, which it's not. We do not put this equipment on trucks ourselves. The hazard specific to the operation of the equipment at the work site. So an workers' obligation. So this is the obligations of you yourselves, the workers. You must participate in the training provided. That's why you're here. You're staying awake. You must apply the training you've been given. Equipment requirements. Employers must consider the lifting capacities that will be required. So that's why we have multiple forklifts of different sizes and capabilities. Employers need to ensure the lifting capacities are not exceeded, and employers need to ensure modifications done in accordance with manufacturer specs. So really, there's no modifications done to our forklifts, with the exceptions of aftermarket roofs put on the small ones, just to keep the rain off you. Otherwise, we really don't modify our forklifts ourselves, because that would be crazy. An employer must ensure that a fork truck has a durable and legible load rating chart that's easily available to the operator. So every machine you see out there is going to have something along these lines that tells you the basic information about the machine and its capabilities. One thing, we will get into more of this later, but one thing to note is you're going to see different capacities based on the height. So as we'll learn more in the course, the higher you go, the more tippy it is. And that's just physics. If you make it 30 feet tall, it's going to be really easy to tip that thing over. Obviously, if you're close to the ground, it's going to be a heck of a lot harder. So the capacity actually changes as the forklift gets higher because of that exact reason. Employer must ensure all equipment used at the work site is maintained in a condition that will not compromise the health and safety of the workers, will safely perform the function of which it's intended or was designed, is of adequate strength for its purpose, and is free from obvious defects. So again, this is why we do our pre-use inspections every day and why we get them maintained so they're functioning. This is a shitty picture, but it's asking us, do we see any modifications on that forklift that might be wrong? Does anybody see anything on there that they don't like? It's not a great picture, and from a distance it's hard to see stuff, but a few things.
Top.
What's that?
The cage on top.
Yeah,
that's the first thing I was going to say.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, they've welded on an aftermarket, what appears to be homemade cage made of HSS and some expanded metal. Not exactly sure why when it's got what appears to be a perfectly good roof built into it, but they decided to add extra, I guess. Maybe it's a quarry or something. There's falling rocks. I don't know. There's a few other ones that are kind of hard to see. So there's holes in the forks. A lot of places will drill or cut holes in the tips of the forks for putting in eye bolts or other random things. That's a no-no. Like, that's not allowed, especially if you're cutting it with a flame, like oxyacetylene. You're drastically affecting the composition of that fork and its strength. So cutting a hole in it's going to screw it up and make it potentially break easier. The homemade overhead protection. There's hooks attached to the back of the carriage that have been welded on. It also appears as though there's a bunch of random shit attached to the back and then the side that may or may not be factory original, if you will. Just things to be mindful of. If you ever wind up somewhere else and get on a forklift with a bunch of homemade crap welded to it, you might want to question what they're up to and if it's a good idea. Employers must ensure that hazard assessments are conducted to identify existing or potential hazards before work begins. There are, of course, multiple hazard assessments in our binders that you guys may or may not have already looked at. And if you haven't, make sure you do, and your supervisors should be making sure that you do. They cover off all the different situations that we use forklifts for around here. Prepare a report of the hazards and methods used to control or eliminate the hazards. That's all on the job hazard assessments. And the affected workers are involved in the hazard assessment, elimination, and control process. This one, I can't remember the backstory of this one, to be honest, but I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory what could have gone wrong. Obviously, I mean, never mind. If you're hauling bombs, you probably want to make sure you're not falling off a loading dock.
I would say.
Right? I mean, theoretically, it should be pretty safe, but still, it's not something you want to have happen. I believe the person was driving with a blind spot and kind of fell off the side of that weird ramp they have here down the side. But either way, not something you want to be partaking in. The employer must report serious incidents and near misses with serious potential or harm to OH&S. There's a very small list of things that actually have to get reported to OH&S. We have not had to report anything here for quite some time. They must investigate all reportable incidents regardless of the severity, prepare a report and provide a copy to OH&S, State Health and Safety Committee, or the safety rep and affected workers. Again, that is for the big ones that have to get reported. If we ever had anything that big happen, which they're going to tell us what those are, then we would definitely report them. So the injuries, illnesses, and incidents that must be reported to OH&S include anything resulting in a death. Obviously, we can only hide so many bodies in the yard. If anybody passes away, we're going to have to report that. Odds are it's going to get reported for us. Those in which it's believed the worker has been or will be admitted to the hospital. And the big one about that is admitted to the hospital. If we take you to the hospital and they treat you and you come back or go home, that's not being admitted. If you go in and you don't come out for a few days, you're definitely admitted to the hospital. An unplanned or uncontrolled explosion, fire, or flood, the collapse of a crane, a derrick, or a hoist, the collapse or failure of a component of a building. So those are the things that we're going to report to OH&S. If an injury, illness, or incident or worker exposure to radiation occurs at a work site, the employer must carry out an investigation, prepare a report, provide a copy of the report to OH&S, and provide a copy of the report to Joint Health and Safety Committee. This is if radiation occurs. We don't have any radiation issues around here. The only thing we got to worry about for radiation is that pesky light bulb in the sky, which is cooking us outside right now, and there's not a lot of reporting we could do for the sun. So employers must ensure that the equipment is inspected for defects before use, so that's why we do our daily pre-use inspections. Equipment is maintained according to manufacturer specs, that's why you pay someone to do that for us. And our lockup procedures are developed and used. If the forklift you are using develops a problem that is a safety issue, take it out of service, hand your key in to your supervisor, make sure they know what's going on, and they will let the maintenance guy know, who just happens to be me, and we'll make sure it gets fixed. That being said, there are issues with our forklifts that are not safety issues that will get fixed eventually, but not immediately. But any safety issues, if the brakes aren't working, if the hoses are leaking, if the seatbelt doesn't work, we're going to take it out of service and we're not going to use it until it gets fixed. Powered mobile equipment. An employer must ensure that powered mobile equipment is inspected by a competent worker for defects and conditions that are hazardous or may create a hazard. So that competent worker is going to be yourself or a coworker who's trained and has experience with the inspections. And the inspection itself kind of walks you through the process of what to look for. Inspection must be made in accordance with manufacturer specs. Just an example of pre-use inspection. All of our pre-use inspections for everything we have here, cranes, forklifts, the scissor lift, even fall protection is all on the tablets. It's all digital. We don't use paper copies anymore for any of that stuff. Managing the control of hazardous energy. If machinery, equipment, or powered mobile equipment is to be serviced, repaired, tested, adjusted, or inspected, the employer must ensure no workers perform it until it's come to complete stop. I can imagine why this is constantly beat into us. Don't work on your forklift while it's driving. I think that's pretty straightforward, but for some reason they pointed out, so I guess somewhere along the line people have been injured because they were trying to repair a machine that was in use. So make sure if anything's happening that we just make sure it's stopped. All hazardous energy at the location at which the work is being carried out must be isolated by activation of an energy isolating device, and the energy isolating device needs to be verified as secured. So we're going to use lockout tagout if need be. Realistically, for a forklift around here, if there's a problem, take the key out. There's only one key. Give it to your supervisor. Let them know what the problem is. They'll contact me, and then no one can use the forklift until it is fixed. An employer must develop and implement procedures and controls that ensure the machinery, equipment, or powered mobile equipment is serviced, repaired, tested, and adjusted or inspected safely. Again, that's how we use an outside contractor. Workers are responsible for the health and safety of themselves and others. So as with any task you're doing around here, you are responsible for what you were doing, and you're responsible for how what you're doing affects those around you. So communicate with your coworkers. You know if you're doing something that creates like grinding, you're going to be spraying sparks. Make sure you talk to your coworkers, make sure you protect them. If you're moving heavy objects with a forklift or a crane, talk to your coworkers, let them know what's going on. And actually one of the biggest things your coworkers can do for you is act as a spotter. If you need a second set of eyes when you're driving a forklift, anybody around here can be that. Ask someone for help. Don't try to do something that's awkward, dangerous. Always get a second set of eyes from a coworker. Workers have the right to refuse dangerous work. This is a huge one. If a forklift operator believes that a task presents a danger to their safety, the worker must report the refusal immediately to their supervisor. The employer must inspect the situation and take action to remedy the dangerous condition. This is going to get into it gets a little bit specific about the right to refuse. Realistically, if somebody asks you to do something that you don't feel comfortable doing, talk to your supervisor. That's it. It's straightforward. No one should be put in a position where they're uncomfortable, because if you're uncomfortable, you're inherently unsafe. This is kind of more the legal aspect of it. This is because there are companies out there who will literally put people at risk. The example I like to use is if someone tells you to go up on the roof and walk along the edge of the roof and clean the gutter, it tells you don't tie off, it takes too long. That's unsafe. That's a bad idea. You should know that. Your boss should also know that. But your boss might be a dick and might say, do it or I'll fire you. Well, then you're going to call the government and complain. My company's trying to kill me. This is not cool. Please save me. I don't want to get fired. Yeah. If someone says get on a forklift and move that pallet, it's probably not the same thing. You don't need to be calling OH&S because you're uncomfortable on the forklift. But you should, if you are uncomfortable, talk to your supervisor. Hey, I don't feel comfortable doing this. Can I get training? Can I get someone more experienced? That's the more day-to-day reality of the right to refuse. The example I'll use that happened here at LJ a few years back, we had a new hire who was, he was fresh, he was new, he wanted to impress, and someone said, take the chainsaw and cut that tree. Okay, well he grabbed the chainsaw and he started cutting that tree. I was coming back from assembly, walking towards the gate over here, and I could see from a distance. He was standing there with his arms out like this, using that chainsaw, and scared shitless of what he was doing. So he's using an incredibly dangerous tool in a very awkward way, shaking like a leaf, terrified he's going to cut his legs off. He should have said to his supervisor, hey, I've never used a chainsaw. I don't feel comfortable using a chainsaw. And his supervisor was a dick, and no, it wasn't me. But any supervisor with a heart would say, that's fair, let's find someone who is comfortable. Instead, he just said, yeah, I'll do it, and he went out there and was just terrified of what he's doing. And using a chainsaw when you're scared of it, like that scared, is a recipe for literally cutting your leg off or something. So that's the best example I've got of what's happened here, of someone doing something that was dangerous because they thought they had to. You never have to. If someone says, hey, go do this, and you don't feel comfortable, just have a conversation. This is, again, going to get into the more what would happen if you had to include the government. There's no reason for that unless someone's telling you, use that chainsaw or I'll fire you. Well, okay, fine. Then you can call the government and complain that LJ's being mean, and that's fair, because they are. So in this case, if a forklift operator believes the task presents danger, they're going to report it to their supervisor. When exercising the right to refuse, a worker shall ensure the refusal does not endanger the health and safety of any other person, and the employer may require a worker to remain at the work site and may assign the worker temporarily to other assignments they're capable of performing. Again, this is all kind of formal. Realistically, if you say, I don't feel comfortable doing this, your boss will probably say, cool, I'll get someone else to do it, you go do something else. And it's just that simple. But if we have to go down the formal process, then we get into this. The employer shall not assign another worker to do the work until it's been determined the work does not constitute an undue hazard to the health and safety of any person. If a worker is of the opinion that an undue hazard still exists, they may notify an officer. And an officer would be calling OH&S and saying, hey, this place is trying to make me do something dangerous. The walking along the roof example is the one I'll use for that. If someone tells you, go do that or I'll fire you, and then you say no and they send someone else up there to do it, well, that's not okay. It still isn't safe. And no amount of experience can make that safe. So that's where you want to call OH&S and say, hey, this LJ is trying to kill me and my partner. My friend's up there doing this crazy thing. Help. And that's where this applies. In our day-to-day operations, there should be no need for it. Just talk to your supervisors. If anyone ever tells you to weld on a gas tank underneath a truck that's being supported by 4x4s, that's a good example. Don't do it. It's not safe. My bigger question is, how the hell did the truck get in that position? Did they get 8 guys from the bar across the street to come out there and lift it up and then walk away and go back to drinking? I don't know. Did they use a forklift to lift it up, then stick the wood under it and take the forklift away? I don't know. But the few things wrong with this, the only thing he did right was he put a block behind the tire. So at least it won't roll backwards. But the boards, the welding, what appears to be the gas tank right beside it, yeah, don't do that. Just a fun example of the lengths some people have been made to go to. Yeah, I don't even like crawling under my car when it's supported by jacks. I can't imagine being under the car. Ugh, imagine what would happen if that thing friggin' fell down. It would just fold them right over on. Oh, that's horrific. That's just, never mind the fire, the welding near the gas tank. Before operating a powered mobile equipment, the operator must complete a visual inspection of the equipment and the surrounding area to ensure the powered mobile equipment is in a safe operating condition, and no worker, including the operator, is endangered when the equipment is started up. So just always know what's around you, what's going on, do your housekeeping, make sure nothing's in the way that's going to get run over. When you run things over, they can shoot out the tires and hit other people. We just want to be mindful of our environment and make sure everything's safe. And again, if you can't see or you're unsure, get one of your coworkers to be a second set of eyes for you. A competent worker must conduct a visual inspection of the forklift before, during, and after commencement of work. The purpose of a visual inspection is to identify the defects that create hazards such as defective forks, hydraulic leaks, tire wear, and inflation. So all things we can see visually if there's a problem. A worker who is not competent to perform work that may endanger the worker or others must not perform the work except under direct supervision of a worker who is competent to perform the task. So this is why when someone's in training, you need to have someone working directly with you who is trained and is competent and can help keep you safe. So we've had to do this for some people before for training. Vitaly, do you drive a car?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have driven. Because I've trained people who've never driven, and that's scary for me because they don't know how to steer. So at least if you can drive a car, it's a good start to driving a forklift.
20 years.
20 years of driving? Okay. Probably on the wrong side of the road, though. Just maybe. In Europe, you drive on left side of the road?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. No. All jokes aside, the forklifts are in the middle. Doesn't matter. And everything's a road, so you're okay. But that's a good start. So we'll see how that works out. Unsafe equipment must be reported immediately to an employer or supervisor. So if any piece of equipment in LJ, never mind a forklift, is unsafe or you feel it's unsafe, report it to your supervisor. If you have a sling that looks shitty, take it to your supervisor. If you have a forklift that's giving you cause for concern, talk to your supervisor. And if it's too bad, we'll take the key out and we just won't use it until it gets fixed. But nobody should be using something that they know is in an unsafe condition. We have enough forklifts that we can always make do for a couple of days till we get them fixed. Oh shit, that's what I was going to do. I knew there was something I forgot. That damn big boy forklift is out of commission right now. Damaged equipment could include racking, dock boards, or any other workplace equipment. Could be basically anything. An employer must ensure that no part of an operator or passenger's body, there should be no passenger, extends beyond the side of a vehicle or powered mobile equipment while it's in operation. So yeah, don't be leaning out the side. All your body parts should be inside that roof rack. Never ride on top of a load that's being moved. Never ride on a forklift. I don't know why they don't bother specifying that. Unless it's in a personnel basket that's approved. You should never be riding on the outside or even on the inside. There's only one person in the forklift, that's the operator. Legislation requires that forklift operators must be aware of company policies and procedures, so that's why we have the JHAs that you guys should have already probably read and signed, and if you haven't, make sure you do that. Policies and procedures ensure safety at the workplace. The policies and procedures are developed as part of the company's health and safety management system. Forklift operator training should include the legislation, the company policies, the previous inspections, forklift capacity and stability, safety practices, maintenance and repair procedures, and skill testing. So we're going to cover most of that today in this course. Employers are responsible for providing suitable training. Workers are responsible for using the knowledge and following company procedures regarding the safe operation of the equipment. Workplaces must be designed to operate forklifts safely throughout the facility. Consider the following. Your floors, aisles, and passageways should be kept clear of debris and other potential hazards. And that's a huge thing. We do a pretty solid job in the places where forklifts can drive of keeping things clean. Assembly's doing an awesome job of keeping that building clean. The yard is pretty decent. There's a few exceptions in the corners, but most of the driveways are pretty clear. Overhead clearance and yard space should be adequate for the safe operation of the forklift. Always be mindful of your overhead clearance. Watch out if you're in a building for overhead cranes. They should be up and out of the way, but they are a risk. Last thing we want to do is hook a forklift with a crane. Pallets and storage racking should not present a hazard and should be of adequate capacity. If the workplace design presents a hazard, report it to your supervisor. So if you see anything when you're out there that you don't like, that looks sketchy or dangerous, let someone know and we'll analyze it and fix it hopefully. The employer must ensure the work site is kept clean and free from materials or equipment that might cause workers to slip or trip. So that's just part of our housekeeping being ongoing. An employer must ensure that pallets used in transport to store materials or containers are loaded, moved, stacked, arranged, and stored in a manner that does not create a danger. So we always want to make sure that any load, if you pick up something with a forklift, you need to know that that load is secure. If you have to tie it back to the carriage with a ratchet strap or something, that might be necessary. If you're in doubt, talk to someone. Make sure things are stacked in a way that they won't fall. Also consider where you're going. If you're driving across the yard, it's bumpy. If you're staying in the building where it's flat, less of a concern. An employer must ensure that the racks used to store materials or equipment are designed and constructed and maintained to support the load placed on them and are placed on firm foundations that can support the load. A worker must report any damage to storage rack to an employer as quickly as practicable, and the employer and workers at the site must take all reasonable steps to prevent storage racks from being damaged to the extent that their integrity as a structure is compromised. And that's a huge one. If you're ever involved in something that damages the racking, tell somebody. It's not a big deal. It will not get you fired. If you make a mistake, if you bump into something, it's not. All we want to do is make sure it gets fixed. We can't leave racks that have tens of thousands of pounds of material on them are damaged to a point where they can fall over. So if you do happen to damage them, tell your supervisor immediately or as fast as possible, and we will make sure it gets either flagged off or repaired or whatever we have to do. We don't want to have racking out there that's in a poor state that could collapse at any given moment. This is just one. This case study, they give us enough information we can actually share, and it's a good one. And unfortunately, involves the death of a 35-year-old in a warehouse. A 35-year-old warehouse worker was killed when their forklift slammed into the edge of an empty horizontal metal rack. They were operating a stand-up reach forklift, which normally has the operator's left side facing the rear of the machine. So they were driving down this aisle in the rack in the warehouse, just driving straight back, and for whatever reason, lost track of where they were and buried their forklift in the rack. Now, this is partly not ideal construction of the racking. Having the rack designed so that it's above that part of the forklift is not great. Would have been better if it had been designed so the rack was even with the back end. The other unfortunate problem was they had these stiffeners installed in the rack to prevent things from moving or bending, but because of the person that backed into it, it couldn't bend. They've actually hit where the stiffener is, so their body was in between that upright and that beam. So there wasn't, obviously isn't a whole lot of space there, and unfortunately the individual was killed, and that would be a pretty shitty way to go. And that's just an example of taking into consideration the equipment that you're using, how you're using it, and if the facility itself is set up in a way that makes sense. I mean, seeing that ahead of time might have been hard to do. It's one of those things where you don't think about it until it's too late, but it is something to consider if you're ever involved in setting up a work area. Workplace design should provide ventilation adequate to remove toxic gases created by internal combustion engines and identify walkways for pedestrians and other workers. So we have the identified walkways around the outside of assembly. The irony of that, of course, is that that's exactly the same walkway we use. They use the forklifts to get the stuff out of the rack. So basically, we just have to do a good job looking out for each other and other people in the area. Otherwise, we pretty much just have access to all the bays via the doors. The only real walkway we have is along the back of Building 1, where it is a PPE-free zone. But in most cases, you can never get a forklift all the way back to the back of Bay 1 or of Building 1 anyway. Walkways are designed to separate pedestrian traffic from areas where power pole equipment is operating, and workers use designated walkways. The other thing is, again, use spotters, use good communication. You're probably not going to be involved in accessing the racks in assembly. That's pretty much just the warehouse guys. An employer must ensure that ventilation systems are designed and installed and maintained in accordance with established engineering principles and maintained and operated according to manufacturer specs. Emergency response plans must be developed by the employer, involve affected workers, ensure forklift operators know how to respond to an emergency involving a forklift. An employer must establish an emergency response plan for responding to emergency that may require rescue or evacuation. The employer must involve affected workers in establishing the emergency response plan, and the employer must ensure that emergency plan is current. The response plan must include the identification of potential emergencies, procedures for dealing with identified emergencies, identification of, location of, and operational procedures for emergency equipment, emergency response training requirements, and the location or use of emergency facilities. Fire protection requirements, alarm and emergency communications. First aid services required, procedure for rescue and evacuation, and designated rescue and evacuation of workers. Training should include the procedures to follow in the event of a hazardous materials incident. One saving grace around these parts is we don't have much for hazardous materials, especially not in large enough quantities. The most hazardous thing we have is the fuel for the forklifts. We have the big diesel lifts and the propane lifts. Otherwise, we're not carting around vats of acid or something weird like that. Limits and TDD training is important for forklift operators, and as safety data sheets need to be understood in order to react appropriately to emergencies. So if we were a warehouse that was handling large volumes of dangerous goods, we'd have to all be trained with our limits and TDG. Again, we don't really handle any of that stuff around here, so it's less of a concern. Operating manual should be available for access by all operators. So in most cases, the operator manual is going to be behind the seats in a nice little compartment there. Typically, the manual is found behind the seats, and employers should identify the manual location. It's not a machine. The AUSA's manual, I believe, is in my office. That's about it. Otherwise, all the ones you guys are going to use on a day-to-day basis should be in behind the seats. Manuals include information such as general descriptions, operator procedures, forklift operation, maintenance information, previous inspections, operating limitations, and inspection requirements. Different classes of forklift. For the life of me, you'll never understand why baggage carts are considered forklifts, but whatever. They are powered mobile equipment. So we have our class 1s, which are just electric motor riders. Class 2 is electric motor with an air aisle. That's the stand-up style. Class 3 is electric motor hand, so like a powered pallet jack. Class 4 is an internal combustion engine with cushioned tires. And Class 5 is the most common one we have around here, your internal combustion engine with pneumatic tires. We actually have a mix. Most of our forklifts in the yard have solid tires because we don't want flat tires. The baggage handler is Class 6, and then Class 7s are our rough terrains. We do have 2 of those as well. By and large, this course doesn't really give you free reign to operate those. I know a few of you guys have been here long enough that you have, obviously, but for anybody who's new, you can't go use the 2 big ones. You're pretty much limited to just the small ones here, which should be good enough for what you're doing. If you need access to the bigger ones, talk to your supervisor. All the different components of a forklift. Number 1 is the forks. Of course, the carriage is the piece behind the forks, the backrest. The carriage is what the forks attach to. The backrest provides protection from objects falling off the pallets. The mast itself does the lifting. The FOPS, or your falling object protection system, is the roof effectively. The operator position of the seat, the fuel cylinder, the tow pin, which we occasionally end up using around here to tow things out. If you are involved in a forklift getting stuck, talk to your supervisor. They can help you orchestrate getting it out of wherever it's stuck. We do have a procedure in-house for how to tow things out. We do have straps that are dedicated to that, and then we have to use the bigger forklifts to do it, so we need to have someone available to operate those machines. The counterweight being the heavy piece on the back that allows the forklift to lift all the heavy stuff in the front. The steering tires, in most cases, they're going to be the ones in the back, and all of ours are rear wheel steering. The step to get in and out, and of course the drive tires are the front ones. Just a little more in depth. So going into breaking it down, so you have the forks that attach to the carriage, and the backrest that attaches to the carriage as well. The support structure for the forks and other attachments and backrest provides a connection between the attachments and the lifting device or the mast. It's often mounted to the mast by chains, rollers, and stops. It's designed to move vertically into the designated channels to give attachment to lift or elevation. So the carriage slides up and down inside the mast, and that's what makes it go up and down. The backrest is an extension piece to provide additional support. The backrest stabilizes the load above the carriage and is typically welded or bolted to the carriage. Forks or horizontal bars suspended from the carriage for engaging and supporting loads. They generally are used in pairs. Each fork is required to carry half the rated capacity of the forklift. So if your forklift says it carries 4,000 pounds, each fork should be good for 2,000 pounds. Design considers the rated load centers as shown on the forklift capacity plate, and we'll get into what exactly that means later on. There are a variety of other attachments that can be used. Basically, if there's a market for it, someone's made one and will sell it to you. The fork locking latch prevents movement of the forks from the set positions on the carriage. So this thing's just a spring-loaded pin that sits in these grooves to hold the forks from sliding back and forth. requires the operator to lift up and slide the forks when into the next locking position. The FOPS, or falling object protective structure, require that every forklift truck where the loads are raised above the operator. So if you have a forklift that doesn't go very high, you're not going to have FOPS. But if you have one that goes as high as all of ours, you have to have this, just like you have to have the backrest on the carriage. Protects the operator from falling objects. That being said, a lot of these structures are pretty damn wide, and a lot of things that get lifted are pretty darn small. So something to consider. If you're putting anything up really high, make sure what you're putting up is secure, that nothing small can fall off. I think it was Brad that had something almost fall on him from the racks outside assembly a year or two ago. Someone was lifting something off the top of that outside rack, outside assembly, building 2, and there was little parts on the pallet that weren't secure, and when he tipped it up and lifted it up and tilted it back, things started rolling off. Thankfully, they fell beside the forklift and not through the protective structure, because most of the roof racks still have an inch or two between the bars. So we just have to be really mindful of anything small that can fall through that. If you're involved in putting stuff in the rack, make sure that stuff's wrapped up really good. Make sure nothing's going to slip or fall off when you pick that that pallet up to bring it out. That was a pretty good near miss, because the objects did fall off the pallet, but they fell on the ground beside the forklift. It's okay, it was a good scare, but thankfully it didn't come through the roof rack. So don't let the falling object protective structure make you think that you're bulletproof when it comes to falling things. It's only as good as the size of the holes in it. And there's a good example. Obviously, this is not going to protect you from anything small. It's going to come right through and hit you on the head. So be mindful of that. Even the one on the right, it's still got pretty big holes in it. So we need to make sure that anything we're putting up high is secure and can't fall off the pallets, because we don't want little parts raining down through those things. Signal lights. Any vehicle or forklift that may be required to drive on public roads shall have signal lights. If equipped, the legislation states they must be in working order, and light packages typically include running lights, brake lights, and turn signals. We have a few pieces of equipment that have all that stuff. Most of ours do not, because it will never be riding on the road. And in the unlikely event it was, we could just use a chase truck. Counterweights mounted on the rear of the forklift, designed to offset the loads being lifted. Engineers consider the stability of the forklift in all lifting positions. Again, when you lift high, your stability gets worse. It's just basic physics. Obviously, this thing is a hell of a lot more stable that way than it is that way. Proof positive. So when things get tall, they get more unstable, and that's why we have to lift less when things get higher. On electric forklifts, the weight of the battery is taken into consideration as part of the counterweight. I can almost guarantee that's a test question. When on electric forklifts, the weight of the battery is taken into consideration as part of the counterweight. Steering wheel, maybe a single or dual, or the axle, steering axle. So in the case of our forklifts, this is the back one. Might be single or dual wheels depending on the design. All of ours are dual wheels, typically located at the rear of the forklift, commonly controlled through hydraulics or steering linkages, usually free wheels, and therefore require motion before turning to take place. Some forklifts have either articulate or all-wheel steering. Steering with electric trucks, 2 steering types are forward steering or automotive style, and reverse steering. On electric forklifts, the steering wheel is also the drive wheel. This design allows for shorter turning radius and quick maneuverability. Yeah, forklifts with the rear wheel steering are incredibly maneuverable. They can effectively turn around in circles without really moving forward or backwards. The drive wheels, the wheels transfer power from the engine to the transmission to the surface, most often located at the front, typically larger to support the intended loads. On these wheels are balancing point of the fulcrum when lifting loads. There are forklifts with all-wheel drive. We have one all-wheel drive forklift, which is the orange AUSA. All the rest of ours are 2-wheel drive. And just as an example of they're larger to support the intended loads, that's why our big Hyundai has dual wheels in the front, because it does carry 18,000 pounds. So it's got more tire to help support that mass. Tires play an important role in forklift performance and stability. 2 different types include cushion tires, pneumatic tires, or air-filled. Tires for deflects, including rips, tears, proper pressure, and uneven tread wear. Most of our small counterbalance forklifts now have solid tires installed. Again, that's to prevent them from getting flat tires when they're moving around the yard. The 2 biggest ones are still pneumatic air-filled ones, but the small ones are all solid, so we don't have to worry about flat tires. Dead man switch provides for additional operator safety. Electronic switch or weight sensor, which causes the forklift to stall or not to start. Typically located in the seat or under the foot platform. All of ours are pretty much in the seats, so if you're not in the seat, you can't run the machine. All safety devices need to be maintained and in working order. Example of the operating compartment. So we have the steering wheel itself, the forward, neutral, and reverse lever. So of course that's on the side. The parking brake, the clutch or the inching brake, the service brake, the operator's position or seatbelt and seatbelt. The horn. Not all the horns are located in the center of the wheel. Some of them are buttons. Some of them are basically switches. It's important to get to know the machine that you're using. The levers are sometimes on the dash, sometimes on the seat, up beside the seat. Do any of you guys need to hit the gut truck?
No.
Okay, let's take our break now. We'll just shut her down. We'll get back to this. Let's take 20 minutes.